So of course we're going to need a class. We're going to make a calculator class just the same way as we did with loan calculator class. But this one has a lot of variations to deal with, and a lot of the code is very repetitive. And what I want to do is to make sure that we understand how we can be quite productive with this and make a sort of almost a template that we can work with. But I'm afraid it's going to just take time. So we just need to do this sort of a bit at a time. So what I'm going to do is obviously go to there, motoring, add class, and this is going to be called running cost calculator. Costs calculator. So we create our class and we've got it, and then we'll make it public as usual. Now, as I say, a lot of this is going to be very repetitive, and what we do is just going to be again and again and again. But that's what happens in coding, and that's what makes coding sometimes quite, sort of routine and mundane. But once you understand how this works, I think it'll serve you well for giving you muscle memory about how to do these things. And what this one is going to focus on is something we've talked a lot about, which is called the switch. Now, the switch is going to be used a lot in this particular calculator class, because remember, when we're working this out, we've got variations. So we're going to deal with each of the costs in turn: insurance, fuel, servicing, and road tax. But we need to know what data has been filled in the user interface. Have they given it to us as a cost that's annual, a cost that's monthly, or a cost that's weekly? So there's a lot of variations to work out with, and that's what happens an awful lot in coding. So that's what we're going to have to do. So in the first one, what I'll do is I will just set up everything to do with insurance. And then in the second video, what I'll do is I'll kind of code them remotely and then just show you what I've coded for the other costs, because they'll be implemented in exactly the same way. As I've said, a lot of what we've got to do in this calculator is very, very repetitive. So what we need to do when we're coding things like this is develop a system. Now, there are more efficient ways of doing this than the way in which you're going to do it, because we could use interfaces and templates and contracts and so forth. But let's just do it simply as we can to give you the costs that we can as easily as you can understand them. So I've laid out, we need insurance costs, fuel, servicing, and road tax. And for each one of those, we need to return an annual, a monthly, and a weekly cost based on whatever is supplied in the interface, which may also be annual, monthly, or weekly. So we've got to build 12 methods. So just to make it seem a bit odd, we're going to build 13. But honestly, that will really help us. So I've laid out the areas, and what we need to do now is make sure that for each of those, we lay out a structure. So what I can do now is I can start to copy and copy that underneath there. Underneath the servicing, let's just make some suppose there, some servicing ones. And road tax. So we've now got everything we need in order to get this structure and make sure we don't forget anything. There should be code between each one of these items here. So I've just got to tidy that up, and I think it's important that we keep it consistent. Like that. So that's the first step. We set up a structure. So the first one is the annual insurance cost, and I'm going to go through that line by line and then show you the shortcut way that we're going to do things in future. So we're going to start with the annual cost for insurance, and we're going to create a method which is public. It's also going to be static. It's going to return a double. I think, yeah, double. And it's going to be called insurance cost annual. Okay. So it's going to need a running cost to work with, and it's going to be called my cost, my running cost, and we'll go to the end, do that, and put the code structure there. So obviously we don't return anything yet, so let's just put something that we can work with that will be the return value. So just set that up for the starters, and we're also going to say we need to know what period we're going to base our calculations on. So that's going to be given to us as a car. We'll call that period, and we'll initialize it just with an unknown value for the minute. Although we're going to no, let's initialize it straight away. We're going to pick it up from my running cost dot insurance period. So that's where we're going to pick it up from. So that's what we're going to do for that. Now what we'll do is we're going to work this out a bit more carefully later on. So what we want to do is, based on the insurance period character that we get, which is now assigned to this period, we're going to select how to do our calculation based on that value that we've got, the period value. So we use our switch, which we've talked about a lot, and we're going to switch on the value which is stored in period. Now that's just a way in which you start this off. So then you put curly braces, and then we have to provide for all of the different options that we might have for each of the values that could be within switch. So they're defined by case. We say case, if it's equal to annual, then a colon, then we're going to say that cost equals convert to double whatever is in my running cost dot insurance. And then after each one we put break, because if that's the right one, we're telling the thing to break out right now. We've got the one we want, and that's going to be perfectly right, because if we've got the annual cost supplied to us, then the return cost is exactly the same for the annual cost here. Now, it's slightly different obviously for the other costs. So the other costs are based on whatever value we get. So the other two are the monthly cost and the weekly cost. So here they are. So if it's given to us as monthly, in order to get the annual cost, we multiply whatever we've got times 12. So that gives us the monthly cost. And if it's applied to us as weekly, then we say the cost is converted to double my running cost, which was a weekly cost, times 52. Now what's really important in every switch that you make is you must supply with what's called a default clause. And the default says that if none of the values I get are equal to either of any of the options I've got, I'm going to use this. So this is the default return value to avoid endless loop or unreachable code. So if it's not A, if it's not M, if it's not W, and we're going to make sure that it is, we have to give it what's called a default value, and it will break out of that. So what we need to do now is that, having decided what the value is and worked out on that basis, we can now return the value from the method. Sorry about the typo. So let's just run that through again. So for insurance cost annual, based on the period we get in this running cost class here, double equals that. Then we're going to have a character, which is whatever's the current value of that as the insurance period. And then we're going to switch, decide based on that period. If it's A, we're going to get the insurance cost and just return it, because A equals A, annual equals annual. If it's monthly, we're going to multiply whatever we get as the value, which is monthly value. In order to get the annual, we multiply it by 12. And then for the last one, if we get a W, a weekly value, then we need to get whatever we've got and multiply it by 52 in order to get the annual value. And if none of those are supplied, we must use a default case which is the cost equals 0, and we're just doing the cost equals 0. So that's the first way to do it. That's the basic switch. Because this structure is so repetitive, and because we're using the same value in this sort of thing all the time, we're going to have a running cost, we're going to have a cost, we're going to have a period, and then just change the calculations based on what we've got from those. It's absolutely screaming out for us to create what I would call a template. Now there are, as I said earlier on, there are different ways to do this, but let's just do it, the sort of hard-coded method almost. You can use a thing called interfaces, but we won't ever get to that standard here. So I've just put a little thing here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this from my clipboard and run through it. So here's our template method. So we're going to always have a running cost, which we're always going to call my running cost because they're separate methods. We're always going to be able to use the same variable names. It's going to be a public static double. So what we will actually copy are these bits in the middle here, from there to there. And in fact, we might as well copy the whole bit in, and we can just change the values as we need. And because we've now got that, we can perform multiple calculations really, really easily using exactly the same framework. So that's what we're going to do. Now that we've got our template, I'll show you what we need to do in order to work out insurance cost monthly. So let's get something on the clipboard. So we'll copy all of this, as I said, down to here. So that's Control C. And what we're going to do is we're going to go up to where we need to put the new method, which is going to be in here. And we'll make this public static double insurance cost monthly. So we're going to have a running cost. It's going to be my running cost. And then we just need to open our calculation braces, our modular things in there. And I'm just going to Control V. Right, so we've got a running cost. And so what we need to do is we need to assess here. We're going to change it to just exactly the same as it is here. And the reason why I didn't put this in the template is that when we get to the other parts, it's not insurance cost anymore, it's going to be fuel cost or whatever it might be. So we won't have a true template. And that's really easy for us to change. Right, so let's work out what we have to do. If we're being given it as an annual cost, then the monthly cost we want to return is my running cost dot insurance divided by 12. End of. Okay? If it's monthly, we've already getting the monthly in from here, we want to return the monthly, it'll be my running cost dot insurance. Okay? And if we're getting it in as weekly, then we have to do a little bit more with this. We're going to say my running cost dot insurance. And now we have to work out, we're getting a weekly value and we want the monthly. So what we'll do is we'll multiply it by 52 and we'll divide it by 12. And that's going to give us the weekly cost and return it back into a monthly. Let's just check that out. So we've got the weekly cost in. We have to multiply that by 52 to get the annual cost. And then we divide that by 12 to get the monthly cost, which is what we need. So you can see that by setting up this template, we can run through this quite quickly. And regardless of whether we're running with fuel or servicing, whatever, then we're just changing simple values here. And we're going to get through it quite quickly. I'm not saying it's not going to be tiresome, and it will be, because it's just a lot of repetitive work. But you've got to be really careful, and this is where you might end up with logic errors, where you mistake the values that you want to convert and change and what the base value is. So you just got to be really careful and check it out. In the next video, what I'll do is I'll complete some more of them just to show you some more of the things, and then we'll just show you the whole set of all 12 functions or methods created.